Jason's co-founder. I'm Director of Business.
Director of Business and Marketing. So,
You bet.
please welcome Mark. I know we use Flight Schedule Pro and have had great success with it, so hopefully he can tell us what's up and coming.
Give me 1 second here while we fire things up. Is anybody here old enough to remember the old overhead projector in the gymnasium in high school at all?
No comment.
It's always the same. Those things always used to break, and we've come, 40 years ahead of time, and still nervous the bulb's going to burn out or something like that. Technology is amazing. Thank you very much, Brian. It always amazes me to listen to incredibly smart people about new things. I'm old school, and it's wonderful to hear people talk about how we can get people to our businesses. But I'm going to hit play here, and there we go. So again, I'm Mark Leeper, Business Development, Flight Schedule Pro, and I've been in sales and marketing for over 30 years. I was lucky enough to grow up in an aviation family. Many of you here come from that background. So I was bitten by the aviation bug at a really early age. Upper right, that's my dad on the wing of an F-86. I grew up and around the 144th Fighter Squadron in Fresno, California, crawling through T-33s and F-86s and 102s. Back in the old days when nobody cared, I used to go out and actually spend alert on the weekend. And that was real serious business then. The 144th was taxed with guarding the West Coast against bear bombers. But learned to love aviation. And at a very young age, my senior year in college, went to my bank. I robbed my college money and went to the airport and got my private pilot's license. So it was an exciting time coming home to show my parents the transcript that semester with a lot of dropouts. But I did have a private pilot certificate, and so they've since gotten over it. But I went on to get my license again in 1980, and at the time that I was learning to fly, there were no jobs. People were pouring out of Vietnam, and it was a really tough time to get a position in aviation. So I went into sales and marketing, and I've been involved in business aviation development for many, many years. My partner's my wife, Carolyn, and we've had a great business. So I met my wife on the first date, and we were at a restaurant, and without me knowing, I come to find out her father, Captain Johnson, Art Johnson, was a World War II ace. He was one of the very few Americans to fly the Spitfire and also the P-51. It was a great privilege to have him live with us the last 7 years of his life. And of course, the stories that he had trickled down into our son, who's now about 7/8 of the way through his private pilot's license. My son-in-law in that picture there behind my wife is a commercial fisherman in Alaska, and he's now interested in becoming a professional pilot. The small one there in the arms of my wife, he's got the written completed, and I'm hoping to get him to the Aero Camp here this summer.
Absolutely, sign him up. Sign him up.
Would that work out for you? So I'm trying to talk about the fact that motivation for flying comes from a lot of different places, and I really applaud Lisa and Bruce and Chris for their efforts to take the aviation information and get these kids into cockpits, etc. So several years ago, I joined Flight Schedule Pro. Flight Schedule Pro is a tremendous organization that specializes in producing the finest scheduling and management software for flight schools. Just a really fine company. And the first thing I did is create a campaign to start reaching out to their customers. They have close to 1,000 customers, tens of thousands of users, and so we wanted to find out, I was tasked with finding out maybe what we could do better for our customers, and we talked to users, etc. And there were several things that came to mind and was of concern with all of these conversations that we were having. They were very concerned about student retention. And they seem to have a big demand from their students, their customers, for electronic record-keeping systems for flight training. Okay, it was a real common thing. And so the problem with student tension is a real reality. AOPA supports the data. So all of the good efforts of people like Brian and Pam here and everything else we do to get students out to the airport and get them in the cockpit and starting to fly, you wonder why 80% of them are leaving. That's a really high number. I'd love to hear your experience and your numbers from your flight schools to compare with that. It's pretty amazing to me because I would have done anything to keep flying when I was learning. So we were looking for ways to reduce the problem with retention. So marketing and recruiting without retention, this is what happens. Our company for many years has specialized in retention, ways to keep your customers on board. And that's what we've got to really mentally realize. We've got to mentally realize that our students, they're not a captive audience. They're not there because they have to be. It's not like they got to go to high school in the morning. And it's becoming more and more competitive out there. They have more options. And a lot of the students these days aren't coming out of aviation families. They're looking at this aviation as a source of income. And we've got to be competitive. There's other ways they can spend their $50,000 to $75,000 to go learn, earn a living. You can open business through that. You can get yourself into dental school. So we've got to be competitive. So the cost of replacing a customer compared to retaining a customer, okay? To keep a customer, if you do things correctly, it costs you $1. If you go to replace a customer, it costs $5. So if you think about your efforts in your business, 95% of most business owners, and I'm not talking about aviation now because we've worked in other industries, medical, for instance, paid-for medical type, but 95% of your efforts are usually focused on gaining a customer, where just 5% are focused on keeping a customer. So when you lose a customer, you also lose referral sources, another very inexpensive way to develop your business. And I'd like to, just think through your process. Are you getting referrals after you go through all of the expense and the hard work to bring a customer? What are you doing from then out to bring in a referral? And if a customer leaves you, a student leaves you, the tendency is you don't have promoters out there working for you. You have detractors on a lot of occasions. Anytime you quit something or don't complete it or you fail at it, you tend to not want to blame yourself, but you blame the business that you're working with. So it's really important to sit down and look at the ways we can keep people. So when you're looking at spending money to retain students or bring them in, you need to look at the cost or the margins that you have for every flight student that completes his training. How much profit does that put in your pocket? And then you can come up with a formula to invest in retention areas. So better retention, more revenue. There we go. So 3 things we do and recommend to accomplish a better retention rate. First of all, how often do we thank our students or communicate with them about how we appreciate their business? There's a great statistic, and we've proven it out, that 50% of the business lost, if you have a business and a customer leaves you, most of the time they leave because they don't feel appreciated or you haven't communicated with them correctly. It's not just price and quality of your service, it's the fact that they feel appreciated. And of course, the next thing, again, you have to offer a good price and a good competitive product. And a super important aspect of customer retention these days is we've got to keep the customer student connected. You want them connected to your business. They need to be looking at you all the time and tracking themselves in a digital process. And that's what we focus on, is how can a digital training process help retain students. And I love this slide that Paula came up with that we just need to look at our business in a way that we can keep them connected and involved. So this interesting story, at least it is to me because it's based around my son. But last spring we moved from Seattle area down to Arizona. It was time to transition back to sanity and dry weather and warm weather. And so he was in tow. He's 21 years old, a senior in college at Washington State University, graduating this year. And we came down, we started the long, arduous process of trying to find an available CFI, and this is the Phoenix area, which is a hub of flight training, that had an available good airplane, working airplane at a decent flight school. And so we finally did. Took us about 4 weeks. We went to 7 schools, and by the way, here's a key concept. We didn't get one call back, nor did we get one mailer or any contact after we visited these schools, okay? We finally found a school that had some availability, and he started to fly, and he's flying in 115-degree weather. And I don't even know what the cockpit temperature was. I came out to sit in one of the airplanes once, and it was too hot for me. So he's out there doing his basic flight training, immensely hot weather. Then he gets sick with strep throat. He's down for a week. He's finally not contagious. He's back flying. He's still sick, right? Then he's up doing high angle of attack stall work, and his flight instructor gets him in an unintentional spin. So 2 revolutions, they finally get it out of the spin, okay? That didn't faze him at all. All of these little setbacks didn't bug him a bit. They were taken off north out of Scottsdale, and they had a major bird strike in a brand new 172. The bird went right through the propeller, splattered all over the windshield, engine coughed, the whole 9 yards. Declared an emergency. They got it around, got it on the ground, shut the runway down. Didn't faze him a bit. You know, typical kid, right? And so then we were talking about this. SpaceX launched their missile off of the coast, right? And our son is up flying back with the instructor at night from Tucson on his first long cross-country duel. And so SpaceX goes off, and nobody had any information about this launch. And so I'm just going to click this. So this is out of the left wing of the airplane. And so this thing goes off, and the conversation is starting between him and his young instructor, like, what the hell is that? And it looks like that's coming right at Phoenix. And so the instructor says, well, I don't know what that is. I don't know if we want to go back to where we need to go. They were pretty concerned, and they called Phoenix Approach. And Phoenix Approach says, we don't know what this is either. About this time, it's starting to resemble the stages of a rocket, you know, that is dropping off. But they called Scottsdale Tower. They didn't know what it was, and they were getting all this chatter from aircraft traffic. And so it was a nervous event. So we were out to dinner, and he landed, and we went to the airport, and, you know, big wide eyes, him as his instructor and himself, and telling us that didn't bug him at all either. So it wasn't until he started running into challenges with their scheduling system, his access to information for scheduling, the lack of his of the transparency of him being able to review his training records, going out to the airport and finding out that the airplane was broken. It wasn't until those things that I detected a little bit of discouragement, which was interesting because, you know, it's telling us that the new generation of pilots coming through, they want to be connected. You know, they want to be able to access this information digitally. And to not do so, he was getting very frustrated and actually ended up changing flight schools, going up to the north side of the runway, finding a flight school which is actually a Flight Schedule Pro customer, Sierra Charlie Aviation, and he's just about ready to graduate and take his exam right now. So lots of moving parts in aviation. We all know this as people that are running flight schools. You know, marketing, scheduling, dispatching, all of these things have got to go into a successful flight school. They've all got to sync, and they all produce tremendous amounts of information. This information is shared between all of these departments. It doesn't take too many pieces to drop out of the equation to cause somebody else, another part of your business to fall apart. And you know, what happens when we as business owners don't get our information that we want? This is kind of how we feel, you know. Aviation's interesting because we do things so much by the book, and we're so safety oriented. We are so redundant oriented. But when it comes to our information process, we are back in the Wright brothers' days still doing things by paper, not just in aircraft training, but in maintenance logbooks, for instance. You know, we still have a situation where people have, you know, extremely valuable maintenance logbooks laying around in gun safes in the back of rental cars and other places, which I'll show you later. So we got to treat these students like they're customers. They are programmed to be connected. You know, dealing with my wife, if she can't do her banking, insurance, schoolwork, workouts, medical, shopping, entertainment, if she can't access this on her iPad, she'll find somebody that she can, or her iPhone. Our son is the same way. You know, in fact, the universities now have had an issue with attracting their own students to their own football games, because if they don't have the right bandwidth and they can't get their iPhones to work during the football game, they won't go. So we've got major universities, Penn State was one of them, that has gone out and had to increase the bandwidth, the availability to their iPhones, just so the students will go to their own football games. So it's an interesting period of time. So I go back to this stage. We've got the left side of the equation, the new generation of pilots. They're all digital. All us old guys, we're all paper. So, but we've got to train the new guys, so we've got to pay attention to that. So without a digital process, our students get stressed out. You know, it's not an easy thing for somebody to come off the streets and go fly. They're worried about their money and how far it's going to go in terms of time. You know, they're worried about the flight instructor that's the absent-minded professor. You know, there's a lot of things that go into flying that can create anxiety. So we didn't have to do a lot of research at Flight Schedule Pro to connect some dots. Apple spent millions and millions of dollars. Does anybody have an Apple Watch on that knows this right now? Okay, so if you look around out there, Apple figured out that if you could stay visually plugged in and be able to review information, that you have a higher chance to succeed, to complete. And that's what we want to do. We just want to keep these new pilots in the cockpit to finish out. And guess what happens when we end up with more private pilots? We end up with more CFIs. Is that another problem that I heard a little bit in my hundreds and hundreds of conversations, you know? Okay. So the visual process to check your progress is extremely important, and so that's what we built into the electronic record keeping system, or our training module, okay, that's integrated with our scheduling system. So keep them flying. But to improve student retention with a digital record training process was our goal, and remains our goal. So we wanted to allow the students to access their training records anywhere online. Okay, here's the paper process. Okay, familiar with that? Looking for records to satisfy auditors and students, etc. And one more button. You know, here's a portal for students to get in and completely review their training records, including, you know, a progress bar, etc. So this is all in one stage. You have one common source of information that's available. Okay, access to review future training events online. All right, another important thing, and we wanted it integrated with the schedule. So here's a front page view of our schedule. Student identifies his reservation. In that reservation, he can go in and actually check. If you look under training there, it's a little small, but he can see that he's got his lesson 5 coming up. Okay. He can go ahead and review that lesson online. So he goes through and finds out what he's got to learn, and that's land it and debrief the situation. We're going to grade this. So we're going to go through and score his training lesson, all digital. And then at the bottom, you see we're going to electronically sign the event, which keeps the FAA happy, usually. And so once we've got that signed, then we click Save to Logbook, and it's stored indefinitely in the logbook. So from a business standpoint, the security and the safety of your training records are really important. Records are money. You can imagine the liability that you have losing information. You know, from an audit standpoint, liability standpoint, if I lost my logbook right now, all my training, I probably have, and these are $1980, $75,000 for the training in it. I wish I could hand it to my son, actually. It'd be a lot cheaper than paying for the balance of it. I can't. I asked, they won't let me. But anyway, so if I was to lose that logbook, and you know, it's an old paper logbook, you know, bad things can happen. This isn't a pilot logbook, but I'll show you $1 million loss. There was a Cessna Citation landing in Florida here a while back, and it did an unintentional barrel roll at about 5,000 feet out on a long final. So they wrestled it back in an upright position and got it down on the runway. So that's enough to get you excited. So they started digging through the logbook and found out it was a forged logbook, and that the real logbook, and that's it, this came from a legal firm that we work with. That logbook was submerged in a gun safe over in Japan out of the tsunami. So take your records very, very seriously. You know, a pinnacle of aviation culture is to have, you know, dependability and everything being redundant. It's an aviation ethic. I love redundancy. Another important thing for students, when you're coming out of expensive training, $10,000 for private pilots these days, give or take a couple grand, depending on the weather and where you're at. It's nice to have a professional looking transcript. You get a professional digital transcript everywhere else you go to school. So it's a nice thing to have to be able to take with you and forward on to hopefully your next employer, et cetera. So we produce a digital transcript. So what happens when everything's digital and we communicate, everybody's on the same page? You know, we start getting less friction and more flying, and that's our goal. We want to keep them flying. So, I'm done. Any questions?
I just had a comment. Having the students sign off on each lesson is also a litigious advantage, because nobody can come back and say that you didn't teach them something 10 years later when they have an incident.
Exactly.
So that was something that I really liked about it.
Yeah.
If I have a maintenance issue on an aircraft, anybody who's got that aircraft booked out beyond that point is notified. The student, the instructor, and the full maintenance staff are all notified about the issue with the aircraft.
Yeah.
So that's been helpful for us. So.
Yeah, and we've heard that a lot of times with you know, unfortunate events, that if you do have it signed commonly, then everybody knows that they were taught something and debriefed correctly. So real important. Okay. One more slide. Yeah, very important slide. Can you advance it for me? That's not the important one. That's me. That's not nearly as important. We wanted to say a big thanks to The Rock, they call him, and FSANA for having the opportunity to present here. It's been a real pleasure. We've enjoyed the weather here in Florida, and or Florida, yeah. Where am I? San Diego. That's how much I've traveled lately. So, and we've moved a lot too, and I'll tell you a quick story about that, because I wake up in the morning and I'm thinking, hey, let's go to breakfast here, but I'm not in that city anymore, so you know you've moved too much. But thank you, everybody, for your time. I appreciate it.